The camera opens on a dimly lit bedroom. A woman's hand trembles as she holds yellowed envelopes, their edges worn with time. Her face, lined with grief and confusion, looks up with tears streaming down. A single question echoes, how do you forgive someone you thought you knew? How do you reconcile the father you loved with a man capable of such deception? And what do you do when the truth threatens to destroy the fragile peace you've only just begun to rebuild? The narrator speaks directly to you. Real-life inspired emotional stories from across America, filled with truth, betrayal, love, and the messy reality of family. Each story touches the soul and reveals what really happens behind closed doors. Before I begin my story, I want to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are? I just want to know I'm not alone in this moment. And if this story moves you, if it speaks to something you've experienced, please consider subscribing to Grandma True Stories. Your support helps more people understand that family pain is real, and that healing is possible, even when the truth is hard. Now, let me tell you what really happened. My mother died on a Tuesday in March. I remember because the rain wouldn't stop, and I kept thinking how unfair it was that the world didn't pause for death. The sun should have dimmed, the birds should have stopped singing. But they didn't. Life just continued indifferent and cruel. Her name was Eleanor, and she was the kind of woman who made everyone around her feel loved. Not in a showy way. She wasn't one for grand gestures or flowery words. It was the small things. The way she remembered how you took your coffee. The way she'd leave little notes in your lunchbox, even when you were grown. The way she listened when you talked, really listened. Not just waited for her turn to speak. Cancer took her from us slowly, which I think was almost worse than if it had been sudden. We had time to say goodbye, time to say all the things we needed to say. Or at least, I thought we did. Turns out, there was so much I didn't know. I'm Sarah, by the way. I'm 52 years old now, and I work as a high school counselor. I've spent my entire career helping teenagers navigate family problems, trust issues, and the complicated emotions that come with discovering your parents aren't who you thought they were. Ironic, isn't it? I was an expert on everyone else's family crisis. I had no idea what was coming in my own. My father, Richard Mitchell, was 68 when my mother passed. They had been married for 43 years. 43 years. They met in college. He was studying engineering. She was studying art history. He always said it was love at first sight. She laughed and said he tripped over her in the library and knocked her books everywhere. Either way, they built a life together. They built me together. During the last months of my mother's illness, Dad hired a hospice nurse to come during the day while he was at work. He'd retired 5 years earlier, but he still did consulting work from home. The nurse's name was Margaret Chen. Though everyone called her Maggie, she was in her early 40s, professional, kind, and patient with my mother in a way that made the hardest days slightly more bearable. I was grateful for Maggie. I genuinely was. She brought a calm to the house that we desperately needed. She knew how to manage my mother's pain, how to help her with the most intimate and vulnerable moments, how to maintain her dignity even as the disease stripped it away. Maggie had this gentle competence about her that made you feel safe. My mother died peacefully, with Dad holding one hand and me holding the other. It was the only good thing about those final days, that she wasn't alone, that she knew she was loved. After the funeral, people came and went. Friends brought casseroles. Relatives hugged us and cried and said things like, "She's in a better place now, and at least she's not suffering anymore." All true, all completely useless. We were still suffering. We still are, in different ways. Dad fell into a kind of fog after that. I'd call him, and sometimes he'd forget I'd already told him about something. He'd start to dial my number, and then forget why he was calling. He'd sit in the house for hours without turning on the lights. He seemed to be disappearing into his own grief, and I was terrified of losing him too. That's when Maggie started staying longer after her shifts ended. She'd make dinner for him. She'd sit with him in the evenings and just be there. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, something shifted. He started smiling again. He started leaving the house. He started living again. I was so relieved. So grateful to Maggie for pulling him out of that darkness. Then, about 2 years after Mom's death, Dad told me he was going to marry her. I remember exactly where I was when he told me. I was in my office at school during my lunch period, grading papers. He called, and I almost didn't answer because I was busy. But I did. And he said, "Sarah, I've asked Maggie to marry me," and she said yes. I wanted to tell you first. My first reaction was shock. My second was guilt for the shock. He was lonely. He deserved companionship. Maggie was kind and capable and clearly cared for him. Why did I feel so unsettled? I didn't voice those doubts. I congratulated him. I asked about wedding plans. I told him I was happy for him. And I tried very hard to believe that I was. The wedding was small, just family and a few close friends. It was held in a botanical garden on a Saturday afternoon. Maggie looked beautiful in a simple white dress. Dad looked happy in a way I hadn't seen since before Mom got sick. And I smiled through the entire ceremony while something inside me screamed that something was wrong. I couldn't explain it. Even now, I can barely articulate why I felt so disturbed by their union. My therapist would probably say I was grieving my mother, projecting my anger about her death onto my father's happiness. Maybe she's right. But looking back, I think some part of me knew. Some deep, intuitive part of me sensed that this marriage was built on a lie. I just didn't know what the lie was yet. The first year of Dad and Maggie's marriage was quiet. Deceptively so. They settled into a comfortable routine. Dinners out on Fridays, morning walks, trips to visit Maggie's family in California. From the outside, it looked like a successful second marriage. The kind of love story people nod approvingly at, two people finding companionship after loss. But I was watching. I didn't mean to be, but I was. I'd call Dad, and sometimes Maggie would answer. I'd hear them laughing together in the background. I'd visit their house, the house where I grew up, where my mother had died just years before, and I'd notice small changes. Maggie's paintings on the walls, her books on the shelves, her presence slowly erasing my mother's. I know that sounds petty. I know second wives have that right. But it didn't feel like a natural progression. It felt like an invasion. One afternoon, I was helping Dad organize some files in his study. He was looking for insurance documents. And I was pulling things from an old filing cabinet. That's when I found the box. It was tucked behind some year-end tax returns, a small cardboard box sealed with old packing tape. My name was written on it in my mother's handwriting. Just Sarah, in her distinctive cursive. My heart stopped. Dade, what is this? I asked, holding it up. He glanced over, and something flickered across his face. A moment of hesitation. Then he said, I'm not sure, honey. Your mom must have put that there. Why don't you open it? So I did. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Handwritten letters from my mother to me, dated over many years. Some from when I was in college. Some from after I'd graduated. Some from just a few years before she died. They were sealed envelopes, each one marked with a date. She wanted you to have those, Dad said quietly. She told me about them near the end. She said she wanted you to read them when you were ready. She said she had things she needed to say to you, things she couldn't say face to face. I sat down on the floor right there in his study, this box of my mother's words in my lap, and I cried. I cried for the mother I'd lost, for these letters I'd never known existed, for all the conversations we'd never get to have. It took me weeks to work up the courage to read them. When I finally did, I read them all in one night, sitting in my living room with a bottle of wine and tissues scattered around me. They were beautiful and heartbreaking, full of her hopes for me, her regrets, her love. She talked about her fears for Dad. She talked about their marriage in ways she never had when she was alive. She talked about secrets she'd kept, things she'd overlooked, things she'd learned to live with. In one letter, dated just 6 months before she died, she wrote, Your father is a good man, Sarah. I need you to know that. He has flaws. All of us do. But his heart is fundamentally good. I'm telling you this now because I won't be here to tell you later, and I'm afraid that after I'm gone, you might discover things about him that will hurt you. I want you to remember that people are complicated. Love is complicated. A marriage can be built on love and still contain lies. And a person can love you completely and still be capable of betraying you. I'm not explaining myself well. But what I'm trying to say is, when you're angry with him, and I think you will be, remember that he loved me. He loves you. And sometimes that's not enough to prevent hurt. But it matters. It always matters. I read that letter over and over. It felt like my mother was speaking to me from beyond the grave, preparing me for something. But what? It wasn't until a few months later that I found out. It was a Friday night in October. Dad and Maggie had invited me over for dinner. I was hesitant. Those dinners still felt strange. Still felt like I was intruding on something. But I went. I'd been making an effort to be more accepting, to let go of the resentment I couldn't quite articulate. We had a pleasant evening. Maggie made this beautiful salmon dish. We drank wine and talked about nothing important. Around 10 o'clock I excused myself to use the bathroom. The upstairs bathroom was being renovated, so I went to the master bathroom instead. As I was washing my hands, I knocked over a small framed photo on the counter. It fell into the sink, and I reached to grab it before it got wet. It was a photo of Dad and Maggie on their wedding day. But that's not what caught my attention. Behind the frame, wedged between the frame and the counter, was a corner of an old photograph sticking out. I pulled it free, curious. It was a Polaroid, faded with age. It showed a young woman, maybe early 20s, laughing at the camera. She had dark hair and was wearing a sundress. On the back, in my father's handwriting, were 2 words, "My love." My stomach dropped. I knew that handwriting. I'd seen it on birthday cards and notes my entire life, and I knew that photo was not of my mother. I stood there in that bathroom, holding that photograph, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. My hands were shaking. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, and I barely recognized myself. My face had gone white. Slowly, carefully, I put the photo back exactly where I'd found it. I washed my hands with trembling fingers. I looked in the mirror again and took several deep breaths. Then I went back downstairs like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. I stayed for another hour, making small talk, pretending to enjoy my dessert, pretending that my world hadn't just tilted on its axis. When I left, I drove around the city for 2 hours before going home. I needed time to think. I needed time to process. Who was that woman? When was that photo taken? How long had Dad been carrying it in his bathroom? The questions multiplied, each one more painful than the last. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through possibilities. The photo haunted me. That woman's face, that handwriting, those 2 words, "My love." By morning, I'd made a decision. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them by pretending everything was fine. I called in sick to work, something I almost never do, and I spent the day doing something I'm not proud of. I searched my father's house. Not physically, I wasn't ready for that level of violation. Instead, I did what anyone with decent internet skills and desperation can do. I dug into the digital record. I looked through old family photos on my computer, the ones Mom had organized years ago. I searched through emails I could access, not his personal ones, but family group emails. I looked at his social media, sparse as it was. I was looking for anything that might explain that photograph. What I found was more troubling than I expected. There was a gap in our family photos. A strange, conspicuous gap that I'd never noticed before because I wasn't looking for it. Between 1989 and 1992, when my parents would have been in their early 40s, there were almost no photos of them together. No vacations documented, no holidays captured, just scattered, solitary shots of my mother, my father, or me. But nothing of the 3 of us as a unit. I was 9 years old in 1992. I remembered those years, or thought I did. I remembered family road trips and birthday parties. But when I looked at the photographic record, it told a different story. A story of absence. A story of distance. That evening, I did something I'd been dreading. I called my father. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something," I said without preamble. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, "Okay. What's wrong? When can we meet? Just you and me. Not at your house." Another silence. Longer this time. "Sarah, what is this about? Please, Dad. Just tell me when." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop the next morning. I didn't sleep that night either. When I saw him sitting at a corner table, nursing a black coffee, I barely recognized him. Or perhaps I finally saw him clearly for the first time. He looked old. Tired. Guilty, though I wasn't sure if I was reading that into his expression or if it was genuinely there. I sat down across from him without greeting him. I pulled out my phone and showed him a screenshot I'd taken of the Polaroid. Not the original. I hadn't taken that, but a photo I'd discreetly snapped the next morning after I'd gone back to their house under the pretense of returning a borrowed book. He stared at it for a long time, his jaw clenched, his hands, wrapped around his coffee cup, tightened until his knuckles went white. "Where did you find that?" he asked quietly. "Dade, I asked you where you found that. Your bathroom, in your house, the house where Mom died, Dad, hidden behind a photo of you and Maggie on your wedding day." He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. "I'm going to tell you something," he said slowly. "And I need you to listen without interrupting. Can you do that?" I nodded, though I'm not sure I could have spoken even if I'd wanted to. "Before I met your mother," he began, "I was engaged to someone else. Her name was Catherine. We were young and stupid and very much in love, or so we thought. We were going to get married. We had the date set, We'd already sent out invitations. He paused, took a sip of his coffee, grimaced as though he'd forgotten it was cold. But then I met your mother. It was in the library, just like she always told the story, except for one detail she never mentioned. I was there with Catherine. We were studying for exams, and then Eleanor came in, and she dropped her books, and I helped her pick them up, and something clicked. Something fundamental shifted inside me. I felt my stomach twist. I broke the engagement with Catherine. It was messy and painful, and I hurt her terribly. I've regretted it for 40 years. That photograph? I kept it as a reminder of what my selfishness cost, as a reminder that I was capable of hurting people I cared about. So you just kept it, in your bathroom, while you were married to Mom? Yes, he said, meeting my eyes. Because I needed to remember. I needed to remember that I wasn't a good man. That I was capable of betrayal? Dad? Let me finish, he said quietly. Your mother knew about Catherine. I told her everything before we got married. She knew I'd broken Catherine's heart. She chose to marry me anyway. But I don't think she ever fully forgave me. I don't think she ever fully trusted me after that, and that was the foundation of our marriage. Love and doubt, passion and suspicion. I felt tears forming in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. During those years you asked about, he continued, the years with the gaps in the photos. Your mother found love letters. Catherine had sent me a box of letters after we broke up. I kept them. I shouldn't have, but I did. Your mother found them. She didn't know I'd kept the photo too. But finding those letters, it sent her into a spiral. She thought I was still in contact with Catherine. She thought I'd been unfaithful. Had you? I asked. No, he said firmly. Never. I was faithful to your mother in every way that mattered. But I wasn't faithful in my heart, Sarah. I carried Catherine with me for years. I grieved the relationship I'd destroyed, and your mother felt that. She felt the part of me that wasn't entirely hers. I didn't know what to say. I felt angry and sad and confused all at once. We went to therapy, he said. Did you know that? I shook my head. We did, for about a year. It helped. Your mother came to understand that my past didn't mean I didn't love her completely, and I came to understand that by holding onto that photograph, by keeping those letters, I was continuing to hurt her every day. So I threw the letters away, but I kept the photo. I couldn't bring myself to destroy it completely. Why not? I asked. Because, he said slowly, I thought it was important to remember that I was capable of hurting people. I thought if I forgot that, if I destroyed the evidence of my own capacity for cruelty, I might become complacent. I might think I was a better man than I actually was. I sat back in my chair, processing his words. Part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me knew this story needed more. Is that why you married Maggie so quickly? I asked. He flinched as though I'd struck him. No, he said. That's a different thing entirely. Then explain it. He took a long breath. After your mother died, I was lost. Completely, utterly lost. I didn't know how to exist in a world where she wasn't. Maggie was there during those final months. She saw your mother at her most vulnerable. She saw me at my most broken, and she stayed. She chose to stay even after it was over, even when she could have moved on to another patient, another family. So you married her out of gratitude? I married her, he said, because I was terrified of being alone. And yes, out of gratitude, but also because Maggie knew my secrets. She knew about Catherine. Your mother told her, I think, during one of those long afternoons. And Maggie didn't judge me for it. She accepted me anyway. I felt something crack open inside my chest. Did you marry her, or did you just marry someone who wouldn't leave you? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I left that coffee shop feeling more lost than I'd ever felt in my life. My entire understanding of my parents' marriage had shifted. The fairy tale I'd grown up believing in, the story of two people who met in a library and built a life together, was actually a story of betrayal, secrets, and compromise. It was a story of love existing alongside deep, fundamental doubt. I didn't call my father back for 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, I did something I'd been avoiding. I read more of my mother's letters. Specifically, the ones from the late 80s and early 90s, when the family photos had those strange gaps. The woman who wrote those letters was not the calm, patient mother I remembered. She was desperate. She was hurt. She was angry in a way that frightened me because I'd never seen her angry. One letter dated 1990, read, I found the letters today. I don't even know how long they've been in the house. How many times have I walked past them? How many times has Richard looked at them and thought of her while he was supposed to be thinking of me? I confronted him, and he said they meant nothing. He said he threw them away years ago. But I found them, Sarah. They were in his desk drawer, tied with a ribbon. Who keeps love letters tied with a ribbon if they don't mean anything? Another from 1991. I'm trying so hard to forgive him. I'm trying because I love him, and because you're here, and because I don't know how to be a divorced woman. But sometimes I look at him and I see a stranger. I see a man who broke someone's heart and kept the evidence like a trophy. What does that say about who he is? What does that say about what he's capable of? And then, from 1992, I'm choosing to stay. I'm choosing to believe that people can change, that people can be sorry, that love can overcome betrayal. But I'm also choosing to protect myself. I'm going to live my life knowing that my husband is capable of hurting me in ways I never imagined. And I'm going to love him anyway, because that's what marriage is. It's choosing to love someone despite knowing all the ways they can wound you. I wept reading these letters. I wept for my mother, who had carried this pain in silence for decades. I wept for my father, who had caused that pain. And I wept for myself, because I realized that the childhood I thought I'd had was built on my mother's sacrifice and willingness to accept heartbreak. After those 2 weeks, I called my father again. I want to talk to Maggie, I said. What? Sarah, no, that's not a good idea. I don't care if it's a good idea. I want to talk to her. Just her. Not you. Not both of you together. He tried to dissuade me, but I was past the point of listening to his objections. I arranged to meet Maggie for lunch on a Saturday afternoon at a small bistro near her office. When she arrived, I could see the nervousness in her face. She knew something was wrong. She probably knew that I knew something was wrong. Hi, Sarah, she said cautiously, sitting across from me. Your father said you wanted to meet with me. I did, I said. I want to ask you something. And I want you to be honest with me, okay? She said, her voice careful. How much do you know about my father's past? She looked down at her menu, avoiding my eyes. He's told me some things. Did he tell you about Catherine? Her head snapped up. She stared at me for a long moment, and then something shifted in her expression. A kind of resignation. As though she'd been waiting for this conversation for a long time. Yes, she said quietly. He told me about Catherine. And did he tell you that he kept a photograph of her? That he's kept it all these years, including during his marriage to my mother? Maggie closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet. I didn't know about the photograph until you found it, but I knew your father carried guilt. A lot of guilt. Why did you marry him? I asked bluntly. Because I love him, she said. Because I know what it's like to carry secrets. Because I understand that people are complicated. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have, she said. She leaned forward, her voice earnest. Sarah, I know this is confusing. I know you feel like your father betrayed your mother, but the truth is more complicated than that. Is it? Or is that just what he told you to tell me? No, she said firmly. I'm not speaking for your father. I'm speaking for myself. I married Richard because after your mother died, I watched him grieve in a way that broke my heart. I watched him blame himself for things he couldn't control. I watched him drown in guilt and regret. And yes, I married him partly because I wanted to help him stop drowning. But I also married him because when you strip away all the complications and the secrets and the old photographs, he's a good man. He made mistakes. He hurt people. But he spent his entire life trying to atone for those mistakes. I wanted to argue with her. I wanted to tell her that she was naive, that she was being manipulated, that she was enabling my father's selfishness. But as I looked at her, I realized something. She meant every word she was saying. She wasn't defending my father because she was blind to his faults. She was defending him because she could see his faults and loved him anyway. It was what my mother had done too. I need to tell you something, Maggie said quietly. I need to tell you about your mother. What about her? During the last weeks of her life, we spent a lot of time together. I was her nurse, but we also became friends. She talked to me a lot about her life, her marriage, her regrets. I felt my chest tighten. What did she say? She said that she'd made peace with her marriage, not because the hurt disappeared, but because she understood that love and hurt often come together. She said that your father's past and his guilt about his past actually made him a better husband to her. It made him more present, more aware of the fragility of what they had together. She said that if she'd been with a man who didn't carry that guilt, she might never have understood how precious their time together was. I stared at Maggie. I wanted to call her a liar. I wanted to believe that my mother never would have said such a thing. But as I sat there, I thought about those final letters my mother had written to me. I thought about the words she'd written. A marriage can be built on love and still contain lies. And a person can love you completely and still be capable of betraying you. My mother had understood complexity. She had lived with it. And somehow, she had made peace with it. Why didn't my father tell me this? I asked. Because, Maggie said gently, probably didn't know that your mother had made peace. He probably spent 43 years believing that he damaged her, hurt her, failed her. That's the burden he's been carrying. I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, exactly. Not yet. But something like understanding. Something like compassion. I'm angry at him, I said quietly. I know, Maggie said. You have every right to be. I'm angry that he didn't tell me the truth about his past. Yes. I'm angry that he hid things from my mother. Yes. I'm angry that he married you so quickly. I know, she said. And Sarah, I understand that anger. I do. But I also want you to know that your father didn't marry me to hurt you or to dishonor your mother's memory. He married me because he was lonely and because he was trying to outrun his guilt. And I married him because I believed I could help him. Did you? I asked. Have you helped him? She smiled sadly. I don't know if anyone can help him the way he needs to be helped. But I try. Every day I try. After my lunch with Maggie, I went home and did something I hadn't done in years. I called my father and asked him to come over. Not to a public place. Not with Maggie present. Just the two of us, in my living room, on a Saturday afternoon. When he arrived, he looked smaller than I remembered, older. More fragile. He sat on my couch like a man who was afraid the furniture might reject him, perching on the edge as though ready to flee at any moment. Maggie told you? He said. It wasn't a question. She told me some things, I said. But I want to hear them from you. I want to hear the whole story. Not the edited version. Not the version designed to make me feel better, the truth. He nodded slowly. Then he told me everything. He told me about Catherine, about how he'd met her in his junior year of college, how he'd fallen hard and fast, how he'd proposed after only 6 months of dating because he was young and impulsive and completely certain that she was the one. He told me about the moment he saw my mother in that library, about how something primal had shifted inside him. He told me about the agony of choosing between them, about how he'd convinced himself that what he felt for my mother was love while what he felt for Catherine was just infatuation. But it wasn't, he said quietly. It was real. Catherine was real. The love I felt for her was real. And I destroyed it because I was a coward. I told myself I was following my heart, but the truth is I was just running. Running toward something I thought was better without stopping to consider the wreckage I was leaving behind. He told me about the letters Catherine had sent after the breakup, how he'd read them obsessively, how he'd memorized passages, how he'd kept them hidden in his desk drawer, reading them whenever your mother was asleep or away from home. I was having an emotional affair, he said. I was in love with a ghost, with a version of myself that existed in Catherine's memory, and your mother knew. She could feel it. She could feel how much of me wasn't present in our marriage. Why didn't you just throw the letters away? I asked. Because, he said, I was terrified that if I did, I would completely lose myself. Those letters were proof that I had been loved, that I had been chosen even after I'd hurt someone, and I needed that proof to believe that I was worth loving. The sadness in his voice was so profound that I felt it like a physical weight. We went to therapy, he continued. Your mother insisted on it. And the therapist helped me understand that I was using Catherine's love as a substitute for being present in your mother's love. I was living in the past instead of in the present. And every day I did that, I was choosing Catherine over your mother. I was choosing my guilt over her. He paused, looking at his hands. So I threw the letters away, he said. I burned them, actually. Your mother was there. We burned them together in the fireplace, and afterward, I felt like I could finally breathe. It was like I'd been holding my breath for years, and suddenly I could exhale. But you kept the photograph, I said. Yes, he admitted. I kept the photograph. And I've asked myself 1,000 times why I did that. Why I couldn't let go completely. And I think I kept it because I needed to remember who I was capable of being. I needed to remember that I could hurt people. That I could be selfish and cruel and deeply, fundamentally unfaithful in ways that had nothing to do with physical fidelity. That's a terrible reason to keep a photograph, I said. It is, he agreed. It's a terrible reason. But it was my reason, and when I married your mother, that photograph went in a drawer and stayed there. I didn't look at it very often, But it was there, like a scar, like a reminder. And then Mom got sick, I said. And then your mother got sick, he repeated. And everything else fell away. All the old guilt, all the old ghosts, they didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that she was suffering and I couldn't stop it. What mattered was that I loved her more than I'd ever loved anyone, and I was going to lose her. He looked up at me, and his eyes were red. During those final months, he said, I made a kind of peace with my past. I realized that Catherine had served a purpose in my life. She'd taught me what it felt like to love someone completely and selfishly. And that lesson had made me capable of loving your mother in a different way. A deeper way. A way that was less about possession and more about presence. I listened to all of this without interrupting, and when he finished, I sat in silence for a long time. Finally, I said, Did you love Mom? More than anything, he said without hesitation. More than I've ever loved anyone. Then why did you marry Maggie so quickly? He closed his eyes. Because I was terrified. Because I didn't know how to exist in a world where your mother wasn't. Because Maggie was familiar with grief in a way that I needed at that time. Because I was selfish and scared and lonely. That's honest, I said. It's the only honesty I have left, he replied. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the street, at the normal world going about its normal day, and I felt something inside me crack open. Not breaking, exactly. More like releasing. Like a fist unclenching after being closed for too long. I'm angry at you, I said, still looking out the window. I'm angry that you kept secrets from Mom. I'm angry that you married Maggie so quickly. I'm angry that you didn't tell me any of this before I had to discover it on my own. I know, he said. You have every right to be. But, I continued, turning around to face him. I'm also beginning to understand something. I'm beginning to understand that Mom forgave you. That she made peace with who you were and what you'd done, and if she could do that, then maybe I can too. He stood up, and for a moment I thought he was going to come toward me. But he didn't. He stayed where he was, giving me space. I don't expect instant forgiveness, he said. I don't expect any forgiveness at all. Good, I said, because that's not what this is. This isn't forgiveness. This is me trying to understand. This is me trying to accept that the people I love are flawed and complicated and sometimes hurtful, even when they don't mean to be. That sounds like wisdom, he said quietly. It's not wisdom, I replied. It's just exhaustion. I'm exhausted from being angry. I'm exhausted from feeling betrayed. And I realized something when I was talking to Maggie. My mother spent decades loving you despite knowing who you were, knowing what you were capable of, knowing that you carried other people in your heart, even as you built a life with her. She loved you anyway. He wiped his eyes. She did. So I guess what I'm saying is, I continued, I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try to do what she did. I'm gonna try to accept you. Imperfections and all. But I need you to understand something. I'm doing this for me. I'm doing this because I can't carry this anger anymore. I'm doing this because my mother taught me that love is more powerful than betrayal. Thank you, he whispered. Don't thank me yet, I said. This isn't going to be easy. I'm still going to be angry sometimes. I'm still going to feel hurt sometimes. I'm still going to question your choices. But I'm going to try. He nodded, and we stood there in silence for a long moment. Then, carefully, as though approaching something fragile, he came toward me and pulled me into a hug. I let him. And when I felt his shoulders shake with sobs, I held him, the way my mother might have held him during all those years of carrying guilt and regret. Over the next few months, something shifted in our family. It wasn't a sudden transformation, healing never is. But it was real, and it was tangible, and it mattered. I started having dinner with Dad and Maggie once a month. At first, these dinners were awkward. There were long silences and careful conversations where we all seemed to be walking on eggshells. But gradually, the awkwardness faded. We started laughing at small things. We started sharing stories about my mother, real stories, not the sanitized version, but honest ones. Stories about her quirks and her temper, and the way she laughed at her own jokes before anyone else did. One evening, about 3 months after my conversation with my father, Maggie brought out a box of old photographs. Photos from before I was born. Photos of my parents in their 20s and 30s, when they were still figuring out who they were going to be. Your mother sent these to me, Maggie said, handing me the box. About a month before she died. She asked me to make sure you got them eventually. She said she wanted you to see them. To see what they looked like before all the complications. I opened the box and felt my breath catch. Inside were dozens of photographs I'd never seen before. My parents laughing on a beach. My parents dancing at someone's wedding. My parents sitting on a porch somewhere, your father's arm around your mother's shoulders, both of them looking at the camera with such genuine joy that it hurt to see. Why didn't he show me these? I asked, looking at my father. Because, he said quietly, I was ashamed. I was ashamed of how I'd hurt your mother. I was ashamed of the gap between the people in those photos and the people we became. I thought if I kept those happy moments locked away, I wouldn't have to remember how much I'd damaged what we had. But you did damage it, I said. You're not going to change that by hiding the photos? No, he agreed. I'm not. But I also didn't want to impose my guilt on you. I didn't want you to look at those pictures and feel the weight of my regret. I understood what he meant, but I also understood something else. By hiding those photographs, he was erasing part of my mother's story. He was erasing the version of their marriage that was real and good and genuine, because he couldn't accept the version that was complicated and painful and real. I'm keeping these, I said, holding the box. And I'm going to look at them, and I'm going to remember that Mom and you had something good, even if it wasn't perfect. He nodded, and I saw relief wash across his face. That evening, after Maggie had gone to bed and my father and I were sitting alone in the living room, I asked him something I'd been wondering for months. Do you still think about Catherine? I asked. He considered the question carefully. Sometimes, he said, not in the obsessive way I used to, but sometimes, especially when I think about the choices I made, the person I chose to be. She's part of my story, even if I spent most of my life trying to deny that. Have you ever tried to find her? To apologize? No, he said. I thought about it many times. But I think it would be selfish. I think it would be about making myself feel better, not about actually making amends. Catherine has her own life now. She probably doesn't think about me at all. And that's probably for the best. I thought about that for a while. Mom forgave you, I said finally. For Catherine, for the affair of the heart, for all of it. She forgave you? She did, he said. How did she do that? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I think she forgave me the same way I've had to forgive myself, by accepting that I'm human, that I'm flawed, that I'm capable of hurting people I love, and by choosing, despite knowing all of that, to keep loving me. That's a generous forgiveness, I said. It is. He agreed. And I spent a long time believing I didn't deserve it. But your mother taught me that forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about choosing. It's about deciding that you'd rather have a flawed person in your life than no one at all. I thought about Maggie then. I thought about how she'd looked at my father with such clear-eyed compassion, understanding exactly who he was and choosing to love him anyway. I thought about my mother doing the same thing for 43 years. I thought about what it meant to love someone not despite their flaws, but alongside them. I forgive you, I said quietly. Not because you deserve it, not because what you did was okay, but because I choose to. 'Cause I'd rather have you in my life than carry this anger anymore. He reached over and took my hand. We sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just being present with each other and with all the complicated history between us. A few weeks later, I did something that surprised me. I organized a small gathering at my house. I invited my father, Maggie, and a few close friends. I had everyone bring a favorite memory of my mother. We sat around my dining room table and shared stories, and we laughed, and we cried, and we remembered her not as a saint or a martyr, but as a real person, a woman who had loved deeply and forgiven generously and carried grace through tremendous pain. My father brought a memory of my mother laughing so hard at something that she'd snorted wine out of her nose at a dinner party. Maggie brought a memory of my mother telling her that she'd learned the secret to a good marriage was knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. I brought a memory of my mother making me breakfast the morning after my first heartbreak, not saying anything about the boy, but just making my favorite pancakes and sitting with me in the kitchen while I cried. As I listened to these stories, I realized something profound. My mother was more present in our lives now that she was gone than she had been in some ways when she was alive. Because by talking about her, by remembering her not as a one-dimensional figure but as a complete person with quirks and wisdom and faults and grace, we were honoring the fullness of who she was. I think, I said, once everyone had finished sharing, that the greatest gift my mother left us wasn't perfect memories or a fairy tale marriage. It was the understanding that real love is messy and complicated and hard, But it's also worth fighting for. My father looked at me with such tenderness that I almost broke down. But I didn't. Instead, I squeezed his hand, and we sat together in the warm glow of remembrance. It's been 3 years since that night I found the photograph in my father's bathroom. 3 years since my world tilted on its axis, and I had to rebuild my understanding of the people I loved most. My father is 81 now. Maggie is 48. They're still married, and honestly, they seem happy in a way that's quieter and more grounded than the fairy tales we tell ourselves about love. They take morning walks together. They argue about small things, what to watch on television, whose turn it is to cook dinner. They hold hands when they think no one is looking. It's not dramatic or passionate, but it's real. It's sustainable. It's a love that knows itself and accepts itself, flaws and all. I've come to love Maggie in a way I didn't think I would. Not as a replacement for my mother, no one could do that, but as her own person. Someone who chose to stay, who chose to love my father through his guilt and regret, who treats me with a kindness that I didn't expect from someone who could have been my adversary. My relationship with my father has also transformed. We talk more honestly now. Not every conversation is easy, but they're real. We've talked about Catherine a few times. He's told me stories about his early life that I never knew before. And I've shared with him some of my own struggles and fears, knowing that he understands, in a visceral way, what it means to carry regret and try to move forward anyway. A year ago, I did something that my younger self would never have imagined doing. I used one of my father's old emails to track down Catherine. It took some detective work. She'd married and changed her name, moved to Portland, built a life that seemed full and rich and real. She had 3 children and 5 grandchildren. She was a teacher. She volunteered at a community center. I didn't contact her. I just looked at her life from a distance and felt something settle inside me. She was okay. More than okay. She had moved on, built something beautiful, created meaning and purpose and joy. She didn't need my father's apology. She didn't need his regret. She had transcended the hurt he'd caused her and become someone extraordinary in spite of it. Or perhaps because of it. I told my father what I'd found, and he wept. Not from sadness, but from relief. From the knowledge that the woman he'd hurt had gone on to build a wonderful life. That his betrayal hadn't defined her. That she was whole and happy and thriving. That's the greatest gift I could have received, he told me. To know that she's okay. To know that what I did to her didn't destroy her. Recently, I've started writing about all of this, not to expose my father or shame him, but to try to understand something deeper about family, about forgiveness, about the ways we hurt each other and heal each other. And in doing that work, I've realized something that my mother tried to tell me in those final letters. Love is not about perfection. Love is about choosing someone despite knowing all the ways they can wound you. Love is about staying when it would be easier to leave. Love is about accepting that the person you love is complicated and flawed and still worthy of your devotion. My mother understood that in a way I'm only now beginning to comprehend. She carried my father's past with him. She held his guilt alongside her own hurt. And somehow through all of that, she loved him. Not in spite of his complexity, but alongside it. She didn't erase his past or pretend it didn't matter. She acknowledged it, grieved it, and then chose to keep loving him anyway. That's the legacy she left me. Last month, my father gave me something. He brought it to my house in a small wooden box, and he handed it to me with trembling hands. "I want you to have this," he said. "I should have given it to you long ago." Inside the box was the photograph of Catherine. The Polaroid he'd kept hidden for decades. There was also a letter, written in my father's handwriting. The letter read, "Sarah, I'm giving you this photograph because I want you to understand something about me, about who I am and who I've been. This is Catherine. She was the first person I loved with an intensity that frightened me. I hurt her in ways I've spent my entire life regretting. But I also want you to know that my love for your mother was not diminished by my past. It was deepened by it. Every moment I spent loving your mother was informed by knowing what it felt like to lose love through my own carelessness. Every day with her was more precious because I understood how fragile happiness could be. I don't expect you to understand this now, or perhaps ever. But I wanted you to have this photograph and this letter so that when you look at it, you remember that the people we love are always carrying other people inside them. We are always shaped by our pasts, by our failures, by the people we've loved and lost. That doesn't make us bad. It makes us human. Your mother taught me that, and I hope, in time, I've taught you that too. I love you. I always have, even when I was too wrapped up in my own guilt to show you. Dad, I've read that letter dozens of times since he gave it to me. And each time, I understand something new about my father, about my mother, about love itself. What I've come to realize is that the secret I discovered that night, the photograph, the affair of the heart, the complicated marriage my parents had, wasn't really a secret about betrayal. It was a secret about forgiveness. It was a secret about the kind of love that endures not because it's perfect, but because it's real, because it's built on truth, even when that truth is painful. My mother knew who my father was. She knew his capacity for betrayal, his tendency toward guilt, his human frailty. And she loved him anyway. Not in spite of those things, but alongside them. She chose him every single day, knowing exactly what she was choosing. That's the greatest gift she could have given me. Not the fairy tale, but the truth. Not the illusion of perfection, but the understanding that real love is something we build through choosing, through forgiving, through accepting that the people we love are flawed and broken and still deserving of our love. I think about this often now. I think about it when I'm working with teenagers who are struggling with family relationships. I tell them that their parents are doing their best, even when their best is complicated and messy and sometimes hurtful. I tell them that forgiveness is not about condoning what someone did. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of carrying resentment. I think about it when I'm alone, remembering my mother. I think about how she spent her life holding space for my father's past while building a future with him. I think about how she loved him through his guilt and his doubt and his inability to fully let go of Catherine. And I think about my father now, in his 80s, still carrying that same guilt, still trying to atone for wounds he caused decades ago, still somehow capable of genuine love and connection despite all of that. 3 years ago, I found a photograph that shattered my understanding of my family. Today, I understand that the photograph wasn't evidence of betrayal. It was evidence of humanity. It was evidence that the people I loved most were real, flawed, complicated people who loved each other despite, and because of, all those complications. My mother's final letter to me ends with this: "Be kind to people, Sarah. Be kind to your father. Be kind to yourself. The world has enough judgment. What it needs is more grace." I think of that often. I think about grace. I think about how my mother extended grace to my father for 43 years. I think about how I'm learning to extend grace to him now. And I think about how, perhaps, the greatest legacy anyone can leave is not perfection or fairy tales, but the understanding that love, real, enduring, transformative love, is possible even when we know exactly how much someone can hurt us, because we choose it anyway.